the main thing we're thinking about is respiration, and particularly anaerobic respiration. Now, if you remember, we get a lot of energy from aerobic respiration, and we produce carbon dioxide and water, and the parts of the respiration process, the reactions which require oxygen, they take place in the mitochondria, but the reactions which don't require oxygen, the anaerobic part of the process, that takes place in the cytoplasm. Now, in animal cells, the product of anaerobic respiration is lactic acid, and it does produce some energy, but not as much energy as aerobic respiration. Now, we'll get anaerobic respiration in, for instance, our muscle cells when we are running in a sprint or such like, when our blood supply and our heart is not able to deliver oxygen quickly enough. And that's when anaerobic respiration is taking place. Now, in animals we produce lactic acid, and when we stop exercising we carry on breathing quite heavily, because we need extra oxygen to be delivered to those muscle cells, and the oxygen is used to break down the lactic acid. We call that oxygen, the extra oxygen we need after the exercise, the oxygen debt. We've gone into debt during the exercise when we haven't been able to supply enough oxygen, but we do have to pay it back after to get the lactic acid. Now, in plants and in yeast, they also carry out anaerobic respiration, but they have different products. So they produce alcohol. The alcohol is called ethanol. It's the alcohol that humans like to drink in all their alcoholic drinks, and we also produce carbon dioxide. So when we put yeast into a nice sugary solution, there may be some oxygen there at first, but the yeast grows rapidly and it will use up the oxygen quite quickly, and the environment will become anaerobic, so yeast will then make ethanol. It will keep making ethanol, but eventually will stop when it sort of gets high, like 12, 13, 14%, and it will actually die then. And that's why if you buy an alcoholic drink more than 14%, actually it hasn't been produced by yeast. Someone has deliberately added extra ethanol. Now there's another alternative that we're going to consider with regard to anaerobic respiration, and that's in some bacteria which under anaerobic conditions can produce a gas, methane gas, the same gas that we get in gas traps in the lab, and we call that biogas. And it generally use that when it's animal waste, which bacteria can break down and produce this quite useful biogas, which is then used for heating or for machines, anything. Just back to the idea of the anaerobic respiration in animals, it's going to happen during a really intense workout, a sprint of 100 meters, 200 meters, even 400 meters, where the heart and the lungs are simply not capable of supplying enough oxygen to our muscle cells. That leaves our muscle cells carrying out anaerobic respiration and producing lactic acid. In this little graph here, we can see the contribution of the anaerobic and the aerobic parts of the respiration process to the supply of energy. And very early on in some intense exercise, anaerobic parts of respiration will supply most of the energy, and that's simply because it's the anaerobic parts are carried out more quickly. The aerobic respiration takes a little bit longer to finish and generate energy, but as you'll see in this graph, if we're doing a little bit longer term exercise, going for a nice long jog, after a minute or so, the energy that we're using to do the exercise is largely produced by aerobic respiration. It's just in the early parts of exercise that anaerobic respiration is likely to be the main supply of the energy. Here's a couple of examples where anaerobic respiration takes place and supplies the energy. Certainly in germinating seeds, and our example here with the yeast again, where they're growing in a liquid, they use up all the available oxygen dissolved in the liquid, and they carry out anaerobic respiration. It's a byproduct of ethanol and also carbon dioxide producing the bubbles in beer. Three little examples here, the beer and the wine, and in the middle we've got the bread, which also depends on the yeast, which produce the carbon dioxide in order to make bread rise. Let's just consider for a moment the thing I mentioned earlier about biogas. Here's a huge biogas generator, bigger picture here. Show you a little diagram of it. We have this animal waste will come down one input, and it will mix with the bacteria, which will break down the animal waste and produce this methane gas or biogas. Very useful product really, and it's more sustainable than using fossil fuels, although the disadvantage is that the methane gas is quite a bad greenhouse gas. It's actually slightly worse than carbon dioxide. There's another little example here of something called bioethanol, and certainly in South America people grow sugar crops. The sugar from those crops are fermented using yeast to produce ethanol, which is called bioethanol, and it is used in cars. Again, it's useful, and just to remind you, this anaerobic respiration, we call it fermentation. I guess the disadvantage of the bioethanol production has been that some people have stopped growing crops for food. Moving on to the pack, I said most of it's fairly straightforward. Maybe this question 7 on page 5's quite tricky, but read it carefully as normal. The amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide absorbed by the leaves. Okay, absorbed by the leaves. Now, it's not the concentration of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the leaves, it's the amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen absorbed by the leaves. And you'll see the carbon dioxide, that's around midday, when it's the sunniest part of the day, we've got the highest amount of carbon dioxide being taken into the leaf. So obviously in our answer we're going to refer to photosynthesis, and we're also going to refer to respiration. And this perhaps is a tricky bit. You'll see that the amount of oxygen absorbed by the leaves is lowest at midday. So your answer, you'll have to refer to both photosynthesis and respiration. Think about the products of photosynthesis is midday, and how much of the products will be being made. And of course, think about the reactants of respiration. Now elsewhere, again, it's fairly straightforward through the rest of the pack. Usual outcomes, refer back to the usual revision guide, use the textbook. This question at the bottom of page 6 suggests conditions under which anaerobic conditions are likely to occur in microbes. Again, refer directly to the outcomes. There's a nice little comparison exercise here. That'll be good in preparation for maybe a 6-mark question which says compare and contrast aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Do the graph. Remember, we will be doing graph. You will have to do graph for your coursework. That's why we like to practice this stuff. We'll be doing the coursework after half term. And then also on page 9, look at this comprehension exercise about production of biogas. And look at the way the question asks us to evaluate the scientific basis for and against the blending of ethanol with petrol. So that's what evaluate means. It means we have to discuss advantages and disadvantages. And there's the extra point here that you must give a conclusion to your evaluation. You must sort of come down on one side. Yes, it's good, or no, it's not so good. And then finally, complete this exam question. And I'm sure it's all going to be a lot of fun. And do complete everything before your second lesson this week.